Welcome everyone to another episode of the HawksZone Rundown. I'm flying solo right now, but we're here, emergency podcast, to talk about the extension through 2031 of John Schneider. Today that was made official by the Seattle Seahawks. So we're going to dive into that. We're also going to dive into, what's John's legacy at this point. He's going to have basically two different eras now. The Pete era he was initially involved with, and then now his own era with Mike Macdonald. How does that shape, and how do you guys feel about the extension? What do you guys think is the biggest part of this? Is it the fact that this gives some stability to the organization, because John's contract was set to expire relatively soon in the next couple seasons? And overall, how do you feel about John's tenure in Seattle as general manager? So we'll get to all of that right after this.
So y'all can sit here and ask me all the questions y'all want to.
Don't you ever talk about me!
Yeah, let's go. It's go time, baby.
Here comes Gino, steps up, takes that shot to the end zone. It is Metcalf, 20.
I'm just about that action, Moss.
You about to go get it. You just like to do it.
That's what it is.
Off me.
Nobody in the world can do that.
Are you kidding me? Trying to do that. Pass is caught back in. Jackson, Smith, and Jigba. The circus music rolls in. Throw it forward. Oh my goodness, he caught it. By Leonard Williams.
This is the HawksZone Rundown with your hosts, Ryan and Bryce.
Well, guys, welcome back in. So, let's talk about this. John Schneider extended through 2031 with the Seattle Seahawks now. So we've got our GM in place for at least another 5 years. I know initially, I think Jay Glazer reported it was 2030, but the Seahawks put out their PR statement stating it was through 2031. So this is kind of interesting now. It's kind of interesting timing as well. I thought, I thought they were probably going to wait this season out, see how the offensive line and everything that, John's done, all these big changes, trading DK and Gino, releasing Tyler, bringing in a new offensive staff, how this all meshes together, because it's almost like another soft reset after last year. So I guess Seattle feels really comfortable about this, and they decided, Jody Allen and Burt Cole decided, what, we're going to lock John up for, the next foreseeable future and pair him with Mike Macdonald, who I believe his contract expires in 2030 in his 6-year deal. So these two are tied at the hip now going forward. So it's very much like Carroll and Schneider, but just, now it's Macdonald and Schneider. But I think the biggest thing I take away from this is there has definitely been a change in the way the organization functions, I think, to an extent. We talk about what things were kind of going sideways with Pete and John towards the end there. We were seeing a lot of, kind of malcontent with just staying average or okay. They were, getting into the playoffs, and they kept saying they want to compete for championships, but sometimes they weren't making necessarily hard decisions that they needed to make. And then over the last, I'd say 3 drafts, 3 seasons, you could definitely see a change in the direction of this team and in this organization to a point. I think John definitely took more control over that situation. And you heard Pete on the Get Got pod basically say that, him and John were coming kind of to a separation in the road, a fork in the road in the direction they wanted to go with the franchise. And ultimately, John was the one that got to go with his direction, and that's where we are now. And so we're seeing the changes that have kind of come in. But overall, the one thing, I got to give John credit for is the drafts the last 3 years have gotten significantly better. We've seen better talent infused into this roster, but it'll be a big, interesting change to see how this goes going forward. So with that all being said, let's kind of look at this. I wanted to kind of take a trip down, John's legacy. So, we talk about obviously some of the better draft classes he's had. He's had, the 2012 class, which is the one that everyone will talk about with Russell and Bobby and Bruce Irvin and Robert Turbin and J.R. Sweezy in that group. And then obviously the one before that in 2011 to an extent with Cam. And then you had the year before that, Cam and KJ. And then the year before that, you had Earl and Okun. But, to me, there's also some other things we talk about. You got the DK draft pick, you've got the Devon Witherspoon and JSN draft, but it's also some of the trades John's made. And, the Marshawn Lynch one is always one that comes to my mind first. The 2010 trade for Marshawn, he's got the Russell Wilson trade to Denver, which, obviously got us a lot of picks in Charles Cross, Boy Mafe, Witherspoon, we were able to, acquire. And then he had some big ones this year even. We don't know what they're going to turn out to be in Gino and DK and those decisions to move off those franchise players at that time. And obviously there's been some, mixed reviews in there. And, I'm forgetting one even off the top, Quandre Diggs, another really good trade by John. But then you got the Jamal Adams trade in there. So I would say overall his track record for trades have been pretty good. But there has been one glaring issue, I think, in John's legacy here has been the O-line and the lack there to pay good O-linemen and keep them around after they've been developed. And I think that's something that for John, I think that's going to determine ultimately how fans feel about this extension is what does our O-line look like 5 years from now? Does this team look better? Does the offensive line look better? And he's got big decisions to come up in this next, year, two off seasons with a lot of the guys from the 22 and 23 draft class that are going to be up for extensions, right? We got the bunch of the guys from the 2022 class, Charles Cross coming up next year. He's got his 5th-year option, but, Abe Lucas this year and, Kobe Bryant and Reek Wolin and Kenneth Walker, all guys at the end of the season that are going to be up for contract extensions. And how does John maneuver through that? I think will, say a lot about how this extension is viewed at the end of the day. If things go really well, I think people will think it was a great move, but I think you're seeing it through Seahawks Twitter now. There's a lot of fans that don't like this move. They think they should have waited, and there's some that, think it's an awesome move. The interesting thing, though, is if you listen to inner circles and people that are really tapped into the league as a whole, John Schneider is considered one of the best GMs in football. But then when you read Seahawks Twitter and stuff, you'd think he's one of the worst in some aspects. And so it's very interesting how polarizing his perception is out there amongst his peers versus what the fans and that thing. So I think it'll be really interesting. And guys, throughout this entire show, get your comments in, your questions in, and we'll be able to talk about it a little bit and, come up with some of your favorite moves that John's made, ones that I may have forgotten that he's made and different things he's done in the past, but we'll get through questions throughout the show. I see one here already is in the chat, so I'll throw this one up here. I thought it was 2030. So I kind of addressed that at the beginning. Jay Glazer initially reported it was 2030, but then the Seahawks PR just put out the whole statement and the publicist and everything, and it's 2031 is the exact actual extension to this point. So it's an extra year on it. I think it's probably one of those things where it'll be like the 2031 draft is when it carries through to. So yeah, that's basically kind of the extension point is 2031. So let's move on, guys, to another topic here. So we talk about the extension itself. It's going through 2031. The thing for me that kind of also makes this really interesting with this is there's going to be a lot of cap room next year for this team. John's going to have a lot of ability to make some more franchise moves type deals if he wants to, whether it's trade, whether it's signing guys in free agency, and next year's free agency class, I think will be pretty good. The other thing that's interesting about this, though, is a lot of it has been talked about, and, I'll get to it in a little bit, but how this extension may play into if there is going to be a potential sale of the Seahawks. You've now got continuity throughout the entirety of it. But, when we look at the extension as a whole, it mainly, in my opinion, is Jody Allen and Burt Cole. Clearly, they were there 2 days ago. I think that was to get this ironed out. I think for them, they look at it and go, John has done a good job of managing this transition, and that's why they're rewarding him with this contract. It's not easy to go from an icon like Pete and the success that they had for that, 14-year period, and then continue that. Sometimes it's really big hiccups. We saw a hiccup last year, I would say, or I don't know if you even classify it as a hiccup, but we missed the playoffs for 2 years in a row, which isn't great, but we were 10-7. We saw an improvement in the win total with a first-time head coach, with a dysfunctional offensive staff. It should be, I think, better this year, and I think you're going to see more of the continuity, and that's something we'll get to right now, is this organizational continuity, right, for this team. Like, you've now got your head coach and GM tied at the hip going forward for the next, 5-6 years. To me, it's going to be very interesting to see how this, empowers John to do certain things. What does this mean for him and Mike's relationship and extent? Like, does this allow for them to be more aligned on certain things and maybe they are still working through, which will be a great thing to see. And, honestly, I think it's a big deal that this happens now that you brought Sam Darnold in and, all these rookies, Jalen Milroe, Gray Zabel. John's going to see a lot of these guys through their contracts, and it's going to put him at 20 years if he stays through the entirety of the contract as a GM, which is, again, a very, very rare thing to have. So it's going to be interesting. But I think the other thing that gets missed sometimes with these GMs is they really run that organization. Everything in that building kind of goes through them, not just the contract extensions, the trades, dealing with the coaches, dealing with the players. It's everybody in that building, from the scouting staff to the PR, like all of it in an extent goes through that, person. And I think John's done a fantastic job of managing the Seahawks and everything that's, gone on with that organization since he took over with Pete in 2010. We have been, I would say, one of the premier organizations in the NFL and a place players want to come to because of the way that John has made that building and that organization operate. And so I think that's going to be a great thing going forward for them. But overall, I'm okay with this extension. I'm okay with what John and has done. And yes, there's been obviously some moves I've scratched my head at and gone, well, I wouldn't have really done that, or moves I've been annoyed with and pissed at, frankly. And I'm sure all of you have felt those at different points. But at the end of the day here, we're talking about a guy that's also helped us get to a Super Bowl. He's now rebuilding a team to hopefully get back to the Super Bowl. And I think this year's team is going to be in a better spot than we've been probably in the last 5 years to actually attain a couple playoff victories. It'll be interesting to see. Again, it'll be interesting for me to see how this plays out over the next, year. If this team doesn't get above 10-7 wins, how many people are going to go back to this and go, well, we should never have given John the extension. Look, this team didn't excel. It didn't get any better. It's still in the same rut that it's been as before. And, you're going to have people at the gate with pitchforks about the Seahawks giving this extension. Or it could go the other way and we could see this team really take off and excel and everyone's going to think this was a great move. So it'll be very interesting. I think it's good for the organization continuity, though, and I think you're really going to see it help with even obtaining and re-signing players, knowing that it's the same level of continuity that they've been accustomed to there. All right, I got another good one in here from Ian. I always appreciate you, man, in the comment section there and keeping the chat focused on the topics at hand. So, yes, it is a solo show today. It's just me. I'm going to be here maybe for another 15, 20 minutes, get through this. It's a pretty easy topic to discuss, but I'll answer your question here. And he goes, what would you agree that's hard to find? A great GM than a good head coach? That's a good question, Ian. I think if you look at the history of the NFL in a lot of ways, I think it's harder to find a great head coach than a good head coach than a great GM. You kind of go back and look at some of the, coaches we've seen: Belichick, Bill Walsh, Andy Reid, Mike Holmgren, Mike Shanahan. A lot of these guys that we've seen over the years, you tend to not necessarily remember the GMs that were involved with those guys. It's more about the coaching staff. And I think right now you're kind of seeing with a lot of these younger coaches now coming into the NFL, I think you're seeing more of the GMs take more of a prominent role and get more airtime and discussions in that regard. Like you think of Howie Roseman there in Philadelphia. He's probably one of the most talked about GMs for a long time. And, John Schneider's now, I think, in that category as well. But I think it's definitely harder to find a great or good head coach than sometimes it is to find a great GM, just because that head coach, as much as the GM deals with certain things, that head coach has game planning and he's got all those things he's dealing with. He's also got to take the pieces and make it work at the end of the day. The GM can give him whatever he wants to work with that the GM sees fit, and it can make it very challenging for a coach sometimes to get those things, and so I think the true answer to that, it's harder to find a great GM and great coach tandem is a lot more difficult to find. I think you can find ones, on their own, but trying to get them where they mesh, like what we saw with John and Pete for years, that's really rare and really hard to find. We got Kick Up in here. He goes, I would have waited one more year for JS. I needed him to do more in free agency, but not too worried. Yeah, again, with free agency, I'll always go to this point. If you're trying to build your team through free agency and that's your focus point, and you're going to have a very up and down, erratic team, I would say, just because you're banking on guys hitting that, and we always see it every year. Teams that spend a lot in free agency don't necessarily have the best results come the season. I agree John's missed on some opportunities to get some good players that could have definitely helped us in free agency. But I wouldn't say, the thing that he's made up for, I would say in the last couple of years at least, is we've had some bad free agency classes and we've had some bad draft classes combined together. I would say he's done a much better job now of hitting on his draft classes, even though the free agency classes aren't necessarily as impactful as maybe people want them to be. I actually think this year's free agency class might be one of the more impactful when he's done with getting guys like DeMarcus Lawrence and Cooper Kupp and even Sam Darnold in here, but mainly for Kupp and Lawrence is because you're getting guys that have certain cultural impacts on the team. And I think Mike Macdonald spoken to that a bit with the work ethic and stuff that they bring. So it'll be, really interesting to see how that kind of comes down. Hey, Sonny, you finally made it to Alive. Glad you're here, man. All right, let's get on to our next kind of topic off of this. So this is something I did want to talk about, and I kind of prefaced it a little bit earlier. It'll be interesting to see how this affects the sale of the team. And why I say that is, everyone's kind of always been asking, like, when is Jody going to sell it? Because it's in the Paul Allen Trust. I think it'll be really interesting because now you've really got a couple of more, promising selling features. You have a young and up-and-coming head coach in Mike Macdonald, who's locked up for 6 years. You've got now one of the better GMs viewed by the National Football League and John Schneider locked up for another 6 years. So at any point in these next 5 to 6 years that they want to sell this team, there is continuity and stability there for the sale of the team with two guys that are viewed and potentially in Mike Macdonald will be viewed as one of the better head coaches in the NFL in a few years, I'm sure. You have some continuity and you have some stability there, and I think that'll make the team more enticing for people to buy if Jody Allen does descend to put it up. Now, I'm not saying she is. I haven't heard anything that the team is in fact up for sale or anything like that. I know there's been a lot of speculation about that over the last couple of off seasons. I just think this makes it very interesting to see how this now adds to the value of the Seattle Seahawks team. It'll be definitely something that I think potentially could play in favor of Jody getting more because of the fact of the pieces that are in place and the organizational continuity and everything that's there for this and the way that this organization is viewed across the NFL and honestly across sports in general. It's viewed as one of the better organizations in sports. So it'll be definitely an interesting factor to that. Now, the future of the Seahawks will be interesting in the sense of the team. And so, we've obviously key players that were acquired this year, Sam Darnold, Cooper Kupp. There's decisions to be made on Charles Cross and Abe Lucas and such. I think, again, I'll go back to this. The biggest thing for John, and I think to make this contract hire a success, or not hire, but extension a success, I should say, I think his priorities next year and going forward are obviously still reinforcing and building the O-line. I think it's also adding more pieces to this defense. I think they're going to have to make a decision here at corner relatively soon with Wolin and Witherspoon in the next 2 years, both being up for contracts. How are they going to do that? And they're going to have to start reloading that defensive line. DeMarcus Lawrence is over 30, so is Leonard Williams. And I know they're both very good players, and Leonard Williams is coming off almost a career year last year. You do have Byron Murphy, but then you look, it's Jonathan Hankins and Jaron Reed. You don't really have a lot of young interior depth. You just draft Riley Mills, yes, but he's coming off an injury, and we'll have to see what he can do. But really, Byron Murphy and Riley Mills are your youngest guys in there. Everybody else is quite old in that D-line room. And you don't really have a dominant edge player. And we've talked about that, on this show numerous times leading into the training camp is, yes, you have Boye Mafe. Yes, you have Derek Hall and Chenna, who's, again, injured, and we'll see when he actually gets back. But the guy that we've talked about potentially coming in here is, maybe a Jadeveon Clowney, or maybe they're going to make a trade. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how John maneuvers that part of it now that he's got some stability in other places. And the one thing that'll be interesting too is, how does the Jalen Milroe experiment go? How does the development of that player? It's the first quarterback he's taken basically, with a substantially high pick since Russell Wilson. And how does that look? How does the next 3 years with him and Sam all kind of work and coexist together? That'll be an interesting thing for the Seahawks future and what it looks like. So, those are just a couple of my thoughts, guys. I'm happy with the extension. I think it is the right move. I just was surprised it happened now and not at the end of the year, or maybe in November or December, maybe at that point. That's maybe what shocked me the most about it, but I think it is the right move for the organization as a whole. But with that being said, let's get into some of your guys' questions and comments in here. We'll do a bit of a Q&A here. So let's see what we got cooking through the chat here. Let's go. So Kickup comes back. He goes, the 23 free agency was bad, but free agency only helps raise your floor. Agreed, completely. Free agency, you're looking like how you've got Cooper Kupp and DeMarcus Lawrence this year. Those are guys that are potentially going to raise your floor, hopefully. And I agree with you on that one. 2023 was a rough free agency period. Pops P in here. Mafe has been quiet in camp. Feels like his career has capped out as a good number 2 edge, sadly. Yeah, Mafe is an interesting one. I'm going to be very interested to see where he's situationally used this year, because I think you're going to see Derek Hall be the one edge on one side and DeMarcus Lawrence will be the other one. And I think you'll see Mafe more in a pass rushing role. I think his struggle point for me in a lot of ways, and we saw it when Chenna went down, even during the year that Mafe had his 8 sacks in a row, I believe the streak he had going, is the minute the guy that takes more of the attention away leaves, Mafe is not capable of handling the attention on himself. And the thing I liked about seeing with Derek Hall last year is I think Derek Hall is a little bit fits Mike Macdonald's scheme a little bit better. I think he's got more power to his game, and he's a little bit more explosive than Mafe. So I tend to agree with you, Pops. I think, yeah, he's probably a good number 2 edge, but that'll be a question, is how much they view his salary at the end of the season. Are you going to pay him what some of these other guys, like the guy in Buffalo got this offseason? I don't know. It'll be very interesting to see. And, maybe if there is a trade opportunity, maybe Mafe is a player that's potentially a part of it if it means bringing back a quality, high upside starting edge. Brian Myers, I'm going to love telling some folks what they can do with their JS hate now. Yeah, agreed. I think there's going to be a lot of people that are still going to be out there, Brian. They're still going to have their comments. I've already had someone on one of my Twitter posts today talk about how awful John Schneider is, and this team's going to basically fall apart this year. And I would just, I keep collecting receipts myself, and we'll see how it goes. But, I think you've got a situation where you're looking at a team that stability-wise will floor out like the Steelers do at 9 wins a year, and has a ceiling of getting potentially the 13 or 14 on a good year. So I think that's going to be an interesting thing for the Hawks that are going forward. Let's see here. Kick up. Drafting is way more important than free agency, so that's what matters. Agreed. It does. And John's been pretty good in the last few years of getting back to track on drafting, so that's definitely going to be, something to see. What else do we got? Here we go. Another one from Pops. Do you think JSN can pass Amon-Ra, or is that too unlikely? Oh, that's a good question. One, I think they're slightly different in their I think Amon-Ra might be a bit of a faster receiver than JSN. Amon-Ra, I think, is not going to see the outside looks that JSN will see this year. I think Amon-Ra is going to be more of an inside. He is more of an inside slot receiver, and that's how the Detroit Lions love to use him. What you'll see with JSN, I think, this year, because everyone wants to talk about, you got 2 slots on the team in Cooper Kupp and JSN. Well, in this offense, and I did a really good, show with Bobby Peters. I highly suggest everyone check that one out, talking about this, the condensed splits you're going to see this year from the receiving core. And what that means is you'll see the receivers really tight. You may see them where if we have 2 tight ends on the field and Arroyo and Barner who are lined up in line, and that means right beside the offensive tackles on either side, you may see a situation where the wideouts are maybe 4 yards outside of them, and that's what you consider a condensed split. And they're in the slot, but they're not, because they're not guarded by, there's not another receiver outside of them. So it'll be very interesting to see how those things happen. I think JSN has the opportunity to be, I don't know if I want to say that, but I'm going to say it anyways. I think JSN could potentially be a top 10 NFL receiver. I think his route running is, one of the best currently in the NFL. I think he gets great separation for a guy that doesn't have burning speed. And I think in an offense like this, where you're going to be asking him to do a lot of over routes, under, sit, option style routes, I think you're going to see JSN really turn into a vital part of an offense and be a true number 1, and also be a guy that, other teams are going to have to make it their mission to bracket and take away. And that'll leave guys, even like a Cooper Kupp, who I think some people are sleeping on, to have a lot of success, and same with these tight ends like Arroyo and Barner. So I think it'll be really interesting. What do we got here from Space? He goes, I'm ready to get the season kicked off. Agreed. Well, luckily it kicks off theoretically on Thursday. I know it's only preseason in the Hall of Fame game, but we'll get some football back, which will be nice. Kick up here. I think JSN has the talent too, but I don't know if the scheme is going to be enough to get him there. I actually think this scheme kick up, I'm going to disagree with you. I think this scheme is better suited for JSN than last year's was or the year before with Shane Waldron. I think you might actually see a more productive JSN in this offense, even though last year with his, big numbers that he did put up, I think he might be more talented and more set up for success. If a team is offering you a late first for Leo Williams, do you take it? No, I don't. And the reason I say that is because you don't have anything necessarily to fill that void if you are to trade Leo. Right now, Leo is definitely one of your top weapons. I'd say he's one of the top interior defensive players right now in the league, and Mike Macdonald is just getting the ability to really unlock him, I think, in some regards. I still think Leo's got at least a year or two left of being a dominant player at his position. I think that's more of a discussional piece, at the end of the 2027 season, maybe, or even maybe you might get 2026 into that season, depending on if there is a steep drop off. But I wouldn't be giving up a late. Like, I get the appeal of a late first, but when you don't have anyone to fill his impact and his production, I don't think it's worth it in the end. Pops Pete, yep, I would agree. Mafe is probably a guy they're going to let walk or say, hey, go out, try and, see what your value is, come back to us, and Seattle will decide if they're going to match it or not. Ian Victor here, which edge player would you like to see be traded here if the opportunity presents itself? Hendrickson is more off the table since he returned. Thibodeau is interesting. Thibodeau is interesting. He's someone that I'd be interested in for sure. I know there's a lot of people that have thrown around Clowney as signing as a free agent here. I know everyone thinks the Micah Parsons thing is absolutely nuts and that would never happen, but we've seen stranger things happen. We've seen players that have been as disgruntled as Parsons get traded. And, there are some selling factors for Parsons to come to Seattle. He does love Durde as his D-line coach when he's had his more productive seasons. And that would be my dream scenario, would be for them to make a substantial offer to go get Micah Parsons, because I think he completely could. You put Micah Parsons out there with a Byron Murphy and Leonard Williams and Derek Hall and DeMarcus Lawrence, you've got a pretty formidable front of a guy that you can move around and do different things. And now you've added some youth again to that group. But I would be okay with Kayvon Thibodeau, and I think you can get him maybe at a cheaper price tag than you can get Parsons, just because of the Abdul Carter thing there. And they've got some other pieces that, but Brian Burns is another one there. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Thibodeau. I think there's more appeal to him potentially being an option than Parsons. Appreciate that. What do we got here? I think the key thing about JSN haters is they have major impatience. I would agree with you, Brian. They do have major impatience to a point. Again, I think you guys will be pleasantly surprised with this offense once it clicks. And I'm not saying it's going to click week one, but I think over the time as the season goes, you're going to see why this offense is so effective at the NFL level, why it's also stood the test of time, really. If you think a lot of the offenses that have come out, you got the Air Coryell, you've had, the true spread offenses, and, guys have tried to run the run and gun offense. And the reason the West Coast offense in a lot of ways has stood the test of time is how adaptable it is, and how it doesn't rely on a certain thing to make it work. It basically is a cut by a thousand blades. And so they can get you any way they want you in the West Coast, and they can manipulate things the way they basically, the biggest thing I can tell you in comparing from what we saw last year and Ryan Grubb to what we get this year with Clint Kubiak is Ryan Grubb tried to dictate certain terms to a defense with the passing game and saying, hey, you got to stop this. Clint Kubiak in this offense will be more of, okay, whatever you want to give us, we'll take, and we'll keep taking until you want to try and take it away. And then whatever you give us for taking that away, we'll go and attack that next. It's very much more, the defense is always wrong. When you try to dictate things sometimes to a defense and that's your bread and butter and it gets taken away from you, it can be very hard to transition and switch. And we saw that last year. Like as Seahawks fans, we're screaming for them to run the ball, but we did not run the ball well, and teams forced us into it. And there was the one game with Arizona where we saw what it could look like if we committed to it. And then we went right back to being a pass-happy team and got into a lot of trouble in those Green Bay and Minnesota games. What do we got from Pops here? In the next 3 years, who will be the best player of the Seahawks? Ooh, that is a really good question. I think it's going to be Byron Murphy. I think Byron Murphy is going to be the next really good player for the Seahawks. I know Nick Emenwari and some people, because I'm a quarterback guy, might have thought I'd say Jalen Milroe. I think Byron Murphy is going to become an absolute force that is going to demand teams to stop him. And I think that's something that's going to make him probably the most valuable and best player on the Seahawks in the next 3 years. What do we got here? Don't understand. Okay, kick up. Don't understand the talk of Hendrickson when he doesn't fit our timeline, but Micah is someone I'm willing to sell the farm for. The Hendrickson thing, kick up, I think, is the Seahawks. I think the Seahawks view themselves closer than some fans do. And I think, in some respects, people look at Hendrickson and say, well, he still has had 17 and a half sacks. He's still one of the best premier pass rushers. And again, you'd have a rotation here. You'd be able to, not have him necessarily play every single snap all the time. I think, though, his impact affecting the passer, and especially in this division, which is something we have to win first to get into the playoffs usually, you're talking about two quarterbacks in Purdy and Stafford who aren't exactly known for their mobility, and you usually are pocket guys. So if you can affect their timing and their rhythm in their offenses, it can make things very difficult. Again, the San Francisco and the LA offenses with their quarterbacks and the way this offense is built that we're going to see this year is very much on timing. The routes and everything is you hit a certain point in your drop as a quarterback, and that window for that throw should be open. So that's where when you get a pass rusher that can affect that, it can cause a lot of problems to the timing of that passing game. And that's where these teams start to fall apart. And that's where we've seen, teams like the 49ers when they've gone to the Super Bowl and other things. And even Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, like last year with the Eagles affected the pocket with their pass rush, and it threw their passing game out of sorts for a while. Field JSN is a 12 and 15 receiver right now in the league. I would agree. I think he's somewhere in that range, and I think he can definitely ascend past that. Brian goes, just sign Clowney and draft a edge next year early. I would agree. Brian, I'd be on for that. Sign Clowney and bring him in. He's going to add a good rotational piece there. You've seen that he works in Mike Macdonald's offense or defense, I should say. And that's something I think that is probably something Seattle has had internal discussions about is, okay, we know Jadavion's out there and, they probably had contact with his camp and said, hey, look, we may have an offer for you in 2 weeks. Again, I think where you will see Clowney and the potential for him to be a real option for Seattle and someone they potentially bring in will be in the case of, hey, our pass rush isn't working in the preseason. Guys like Jared Ivey, are struggling. We don't have anyone really behind Hall and Mafe and Lawrence to really affect the pocket. We need to go get somebody and bring somebody in that can help do that and at least, take maybe some snaps away from them on rundown so that Hall and Mafe can be more effective during the pass and the pass rush, I should say. So I think that's what you'll see if that move is to be made is it'll be, hey, we haven't seen anything from any of these younger guys. We need to get someone in here that has proven production. What else do we got kicking around? This one's in here from Sonny. Oh, we having an issue with my chat here, guys. Sorry about that. All right, there we go. Is the scheme favorable to the offense as a whole? I would say yes. It is very favorable to the offense as a whole, guys. It takes pressure off of everybody. It takes pressure off of the offensive line to an extent with this wide zone scheme. You don't have to honestly rely on as much power. It's more on angles and getting yourselves aligned and set properly. So that's definitely a bonus to it. And again, your receiving core, you don't need, like, I know a lot of people are saying, oh, we need an X. We need a big X receiver. You don't in this offense. With the condenses and the formations and the motion and all that kind of stuff, it creates mismatches on its own. So I think as a whole, it'll definitely help the offense. And for the quarterback, they don't have to make line calls in this offense. They're not setting protections or making changes to it. So again, I think that eases some of the pressure on your quarterback to just go out and read coverages, go out and understand where the pressure will be coming from so he can, set himself up and be on those pages. So it'll be interesting to see how that all works. Let's see. We got Rockman Drums in here. How's it going, man? Yeah, I'm glad John got extended too. Pops has got, which team is better, the Seahawks or Broncos? I slightly nudge Broncos. That's a really good one, Pops. I might go with the Seahawks. I think the Seahawks have a top 5 defense right now. And I think their offense will come up to being probably somewhere top 15. I think it's also going to be interesting to see how Bo Nix handles year 2 and teams actually having a book on him now and what he can do. It'll be very interesting. I think they're definitely close to each other. And if I was to rank them, I'd say, maybe the Seahawks have a slight edge, but that's about it. Prime's in here, and Prime, I completely agree with you, dude. The scheme is very interesting once you get into it and really start to dive deep into it. And guys, I suggest go buy yourself a couple of Bobby Peters' books. They're on Amazon. I think they're like $20. The links for them are in the show description of the show he did with me. Go look at the McVay ones. Go look at the Kyle Shanahan ones and the Kevin O'Connell one he just did. Like, there's so much in there that'll tell you how this Kubiak scheme is going to run and how it functions. And to Prime's point here, like Kubiak last year, up until Carr went down, Olave went down, their offensive line all went down. They were one of the better offenses in the NFL, and they were probably one of the highest motion use offenses, which is something we've wanted to see here for a few years and thought we were getting with Shane Waldron. And in some respects, when I was at the football fest last year, thought I was seeing from Ryan Grubb, and it all kind of fell apart. Kubiak actually commits to it and uses it a lot of the time. So it'll definitely be something that I think will be really interesting to see. Oh, Amy's here. Amy, nice to see you in the chat. Haven't seen you there for a bit, but it's good to see you. What do we got in here? All right. What do we got from Rockman here? What do you guys think about grabbing an edge that other teams try to put on their practice squad? That's always an option. Seattle's always good at it, and Seattle usually tries to get those guys that they have someone they've identified with, like a late round pick. You think back to some of the players that John's traded for in the past at the end of preseason, Coleman, some of those other guys that he's done that with in the past. I think it's definitely an option. But again, if a guy's going on their practice squad, how much of an impact he'll have here, I don't know. And that's where I hope guys like a Jared Ivey or Connor O'Toole can really make an impression in the preseason. But it'll be interesting to see. What else do we got in here, guys? We'll do a couple more minutes. Here's one from Sonny again. I think this is an interesting one. Throughout the Seahawks history, have they always been a run-heavy team or pass-heavy team? It seems like they're always switching between either or. I would say predominantly Seattle's been more of a run-heavy team. You think back to the Chuck Knox era of ground and pound. Even Mike Holmgren's offenses for a while there in the early 2000s were very much predicated on Sean Alexander in that run game, setting up the play action for the passing game because we didn't really have a amazing assortment of receivers. We did have Darrell Jackson and Bobby Ingram who really headlined that group. Seattle's predominantly wanted to be a team that runs the ball and controls the game with a control-based offense. Only even when you think of Pete's early, teams here with Marshawn and, beast mode and everything, it was run the ball, deep shots off of play action. They weren't really a heavy throw it until the midpoint, the 2010s kind of area with, should I say Russell and let him cook, Russ Cook thing. That's when they went pass heavy, and we kind of saw the results of that. We had that one year, I think it was 2017, where Russell was like 98% of the offense outside of a J.D. McKissick rushing touchdown. He scored every rushing touchdown on the ground, and everything else was through the air. Seattle's never had a lot of success, in my opinion, when they've gone completely pass happy. And we saw that last year. They went pass happy and abandoned the run in a lot of games that if they kept with a run game and had some assortment of it, they probably would have won. Seattle's been known to have good defenses and in a lot of cases, great defenses. they are better suited, I think, at being a run-centric offense with passing built off of it than they are to be the other way around. Hopefully that answers your question there, Sonny. What do we got here? Bryce, you know if the next year's receiver class is any good? I want one in the next 2 rounds. I haven't done a deep dive yet on the receiver group. It's going to be definitely a good quarterback class. I think it'll also be a pretty good DN class. I'll get into the draft stuff here shortly and start really looking into it. Receivers are kind of turning into the running backs of like the 90s and stuff where you could find receivers at a dime a dozen. I personally think, Torrey Horton's going to be, I think, a pretty good receiver here in Seattle. And I think he actually may end up being the counterpart to JSN after Cup, contract ends. I also will be honest, guys, I don't think Cooper Kupp's a one-year guy. I think from everything I've heard from Dan Viens and Curtis Allen and everyone that's been to camp at some point, which I will get the fortune of being there this weekend, Cooper Kupp looks really good, apparently. I think Cooper Kupp may play out his contract here. So it might be 3 years before we see a Seahawks really go and look at receivers high early in the draft. So, but if I do see anybody, I definitely will make sure that they're noted and how they fit with the Seahawks, and I'll start bringing out some names of the draft stuff shortly here. What else do we got? Oh, here's one from Pops. Here we go. Are you guys going to be streaming live the show on Saturday for viewers to watch online? Yes, we will. And Pops, that's a really good way for me to segue into this just quickly here with everybody. So this Saturday down at Fast Fashion Brewery, there is the Ultimate Seahawks Crossover Pod Show. So it's myself, Brandon Kane, Dan Viens. We're going to be joined by Mookie Alexander as well. He'll be there as well. And from 2 to 3, Corbin Smith from Locked On Seahawks and the Emerald City Spectrum. He'll be joining us as well before the Football Fest there that starts at 6 o'clock at Lumen Field. So come on down, guys. Come meet us. We'll be doing the show live. It'll be streamed live on YouTube. It'll be a roundtable. We're going to talk everything from what we've seen at training camp to how we view this team, the upcoming season, everything that we're looking for at the Fan Fest games or mock practice, whatever you want to call it now. So yeah, come on down, have a drink with us, get to know us outside of what you see of us on YouTube here and in the chats and stuff. And so this will be plastered all over Twitter. I know Dan's already put some out, Brandon's put it out, Mookie's put it out at Field Goals. The address is right there, guys. So it's down in the Soto area. So come on down and see us. And me and Dan will also be there on Friday, as we will be doing a show for Seahawks Forever on Friday night at 7 o'clock as well at Fast Fashion Brewery. So come on down there, guys, and say hi. So what else do we have in here? Prime's got, that's a better answer than mine was, Bryce. Seems chasing run versus pass ratio isn't as important as complementary ball in total. No, total in agreement. If you have complementary, I know everyone talks about like the 60-40 split. You hear, Carroll used to talk about it a lot. The thing for me, when you play complementary football and you have a defense like we will have this year, if you can allow those guys to go out and kind of what we did with, the 2013 Super Bowl team was we let that defense go and do its thing, and the offense just had to manage the game and limit its, faults or hiccups in the process. Russell wasn't necessarily the superstar quarterback yet. It was basically go out there, make some plays, but don't put the ball and give the other team extra possessions. And I think that's what you'll see with this year's team is I don't think Sam Darnold's going to regress to New York Jets or Carolina Panthers Sam Darnold. There's a lot of people that seem to think that's what's going to happen here. And I don't see it. I think he's, made a lot of changes to his game and understanding of his game as he's matured in the league. I think people forget, he's still under 30. He's only 28, and he's been in the league for 6 years plus now. So he came into the league as a 21-year-old. He went to a situation where Adam Gase tried to turn him into Peyton Manning in New York, which was never going to work. He's finally had a decent offensive coordinator, when he was in San Francisco as the backup and with Kevin O'Connell last year in Minnesota. I don't know if we'll see him put up 35 touchdowns again, but I think anywhere between 30 and 27 touchdowns this year, 25 touchdowns, and maybe between 12 and 8 interceptions for, like I've said, 32 to 3,600 yards. I could see him doing that with a 68, 69 completion percentage. And for me, that's fine because that means we're also producing in the run game. If we see Sam Darnold put up bigger numbers than he did last year, there's probably an issue with the run game, and that's something that's going to give us all something to worry about. So, what else we got? Rockman goes, Cody White has stepped up. He looked pretty good in spots last year too. He's also apparently having another good camp, Rockman. He's a guy that I think will be very interesting to see how the Kenny McIntosh injury now will, I think, play a bigger role on how that room is, the receiver room is broken down at camp cutdown and how many guys they keep. Because I think there was a good chance Seattle was going to keep 4 running backs when Kenny was healthy. Martinez himself, Charbonnet and Walker, and then I think Robbie Oots is the actual fullback now. I think Brady Russell's moved more back to tight end, and I think that was the 5. And I think you may have seen 5 receivers kept at that point. Now with Kenny's injury, I think they're going to keep 3. I think it'll be probably Walker, Charbonnet, Martinez, and Oots. So you only keep 4 in that back room, and I think you may get 6 receivers. So Cody White may find a way to get himself on the team. Yeah, sorry, Sonny. Unfortunately, the show is not going to be in Wisconsin, but you can definitely join in live and be in the chat. So that'll be something that'll be for everyone to do if they're not able to actually attend the show in person. No space. I had some pretty high hopes for Kenny Mack as well this year. I was really excited when he started to get some actual carries at the end of last year, and you could see his impact as a runner. Hopefully he comes back healthy next year and he's able to, add something to that room. So it'll be really interesting to see. But guys, outside of that, I think we're going to call that a wrap on today's show. We've been on here for about 46 minutes or so, guys. So next time you'll see me, guys, I will be down in Seattle, and I will be with Dan Viens and Brandon Kane and all those guys, Mookie Alexander and Corbin Smith, and we'll be talking a whole bunch of Hawks and stuff, and I'll be down at the training camp. So super excited for that, guys. So again, if you guys can make it out to see us at our live shows, please come say hi. And we appreciate, guys. We got over 2,000 subscribers now to the HawksZone Rundown, which is huge. So really appreciate that and your guys' constant support all the time we put out our content. A couple things coming out. So there is going to be the Rams and 49er previews. We had 2 different guys that are connected to the Rams organizations and content creators come on and do previews for those 2 shows. So we'll have those coming up this week. So make sure you guys have your notifications and you subscribe to the channel so that way you don't miss those. They're really good content and good insight into those teams. And then obviously we'll have the live shows Friday and Saturday. Those will be another thing. And then we'll kind of probably next week, me and Ryan will do our first preview of a preseason game, kind of get that kicked off. And then we'll also be releasing our entire show schedule for the Seahawks season. We're going to try and gear guys to be a little bit more consistent with content throughout the week. We're going to have a couple different shows. We're going to definitely still do our preview show and live post-game show after every game, which you guys got accustomed to last year. But we're also going to add a couple things in throughout the week that maybe just me flying solo or me and Ryan at the same time. So make sure you guys check those out. But again, sub to the channel. Click the notification button. Go over, check out HawksZoneRundown.com. We've got a whole bunch of merch that's been put out there, golf shirts and everything. So make sure you guys take a look at that. And then, guys, join our membership program because there's going to be a lot of things come this fall that members will get access to first, and sometimes members will only get access to. So make sure you guys check out that as well. You can also find our stuff over at fieldgulls.com with that crew, as our shows posted up there all the time. So go over there and check our stuff out as well as everyone else that's a content creator over at Field Goals. But guys, that's it for me. Next time you'll see me, I'll be at Seahawks training camp. So with that said, go Hawks.